Thank you and good morning. So I hope to share with you a little bit of the enthusiasm that I have for this initiative. But first I want to be grateful for this opportunity. So this actually marks a success in all of the work that you have all done. And you might say, what are you talking about? This commitment, the commitment by the state of Ohio for the SOAR study is actually an outcome of the hard work that you do. And what I mean by that is that we have learned through the hard work that you have done for time and time again that addiction and mental health challenges are not a foregone conclusion. So as Eric was talking about, people are plastic. We live in communities where we can learn and grow and change. And health and wellness is actually something that we can drive towards and attain. So I come today as a messenger of partnership and hope, and actually to congratulate you all because you have started to change the narrative around mental health and addiction stigma. That's the only reason why I'm here. If that hadn't changed through your hard work, I wouldn't be standing here. And I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years. So, believe it or not. So, I got to find my notes here. Here we go. I got it. All right. So, we start out with the bad news, which is what we don't know. Why do some folks actually fall down? And I would put to you that we all fall down at different moments in our lives. And actually mental health challenges are the norm rather than the exception. But that doesn't mean that we are destined to be what yesterday was. Tomorrow is a new day. Today is a new day. And so when we think about adversity and trauma, we acknowledge and we accept that these are real things. And we don't brush them under the rug and say, oh, just rub some dirt on it, if we're talking about football analogies. We acknowledge and we accept that these challenges are real and that people do struggle. And that struggle of being a human sometimes is hard. But we also embrace the idea that we have incredible capabilities as human beings to adapt, evolve, and demonstrate resilience. And that is the essence of why I'm here talking to you today, is how do we find new pathways to resilience, and how do we strengthen the existing pathways that you work with people every day to build and to move toward. So there is a biology to this. There's this really expensive piece of equipment sitting on top of my shoulders that sometimes works appropriately and sometimes messes up. But our brains actually are the drivers of mental health challenges and addiction challenges that we have. But our brains do not live in isolation, right? We as humans are actually social creatures. We live in communities, we live in families, we live in work networks and social networks. And that is part of what we want to understand with SOAR is what is the who, the why, and the how of mental health and addictions challenges so that we can provide information for you all on how to bend the curve. I was just recently celebrating my 30th anniversary because I'm very lucky that I have a very tolerant and loving spouse in the Virgin Islands. And I'm going to share an analogy with you. In the Virgin Islands, there was privateering and piracy for a good chunk of time, and I got to do some snorkeling and see one old ship's anchor. And you might say, well, how does the SOAR study fit into what Adam H. does? And the analogy I'd like to put out to you is that we are the people who are up in the crow's nest with our periscope looking, the spotter's glass, they didn't have a periscope then, looking off to the future to try and understand where the treasure is. And the treasure in this analogy is actually these new pathways to resilience. We are not changing or directing anything that you are all doing. And in fact, my role here is actually to start the discussion about partnership. How can we be good partners, and how can you teach us what is successful you're doing every day, and how can we listen, and how can we learn? So you've heard the numbers from Erica Clark-Jones, and I would put to you that one way to look at this is to say that Ohio is at the center of a national epidemic of deaths of despair. I would also say to you that Ohio is at the center of a pivotal opportunity to bend the curve for these deaths of despair. And I, as an eternal optimist, would like to choose that second storyline because I think we have all we need to actually move forward to bend those curves. So when we think about what we need to know better, we actually need to listen and learn from the people that you work with every day and from all of you. What are those pathways to resilience and health? And when I say resilience, I don't mean what is portrayed in the media often, which is somebody winning a marathon or somebody, spiking the football after they scored a touchdown. Sometimes resilience is actually getting up, getting the kids off to school in the morning. Sometimes resilience is being able to show up for work and feeling like you've contributed in a meaningful way. Sometimes resilience is finding housing. So when we talk about resilience, I want to embrace a broad definition of today can be better than yesterday was. There's a really pivotal quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was referring to a war and refugee crises, but the quote holds true for what we're talking about. There comes a point when we must stop just pulling people out of the river, and we need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And of course, then the analogy holds that we might put in life preservers, guardrails, and other things that help people to stay well. This is our river, if you think about it, and you all know the things that I'm going to put on this slide. Suicide and overdose are challenges, and those numbers are a little bit better for overdose this year, but suicide is continuing to go in the wrong direction. And as Erica pointed out, the overdose numbers compared to a decade ago are actually really high and disturbing. But when we think about the causes and risk factors, I want to point out, sorry, I don't know if my pointer is going to go that far, maybe it won't, but the causes and risk factors, what we're interested in thinking about is what are the modifiable factors? What are the things that people can actually change? Because when we're talking about mental health and addictions, the language of stigma is this is what I'm supposed to be, this is what I'm destined to be, and I'm stuck. And you work with people every day and you try and change that language to say, how can things be different today and tomorrow? How can we actually develop support and resilience? So when we think about causes and risk factors, we're not sort of saying, well, you've been dealt a bad hand and you need to accept it. We're talking about actually how can things get better, and what are the things that we can do and learn to help move towards that. This is the point where we kind of cheer for Ohio. This is the first study of its type where we have a governor and a legislature and our AdMH boards, thank you, who are moving towards this idea that illness does not live solely within a person. Illness is a part of a system that includes biological, psychological, and social factors. And I know that you all know people who are actually resilient, maybe in part because of their own actions, but also in part because of the systems that they're embedded in. You know, a loving parent, a caring spouse, a supportive boss or supervisor at work, a great therapist. There are different pieces that come into what might be resilience that's not just embedded within a person. And we should embrace, accept, and elevate that as a storyline, is that we do not stand alone, we stand together. So this is the genesis, and for those of you who have not heard of the Framingham Heart Study, you have heard of cholesterol, right? You haven't heard of blood pressure. We have knowledge today because of 75 years of scientific learning from the Framingham Heart Study about what are the drivers of cardiovascular illness. That's what we hope for from SOAR, is that SOAR can actually help us to take that 12.8 number that Eric was talking about for suicide and say, well, actually, that number could be 6, right? That number could be 8. What are the things that we can actually do to move those numbers lower? And if I could be so bold, what are the things we could do to sort of say about addiction? Let's go to the days when we were pre-synthetic, right? The numbers of pre-synthetic, and I think we can. And so, you know, learning what are the factors that drive towards these illnesses and poor outcomes, then helps to highlight some of these modifiable risk factors that people can then learn about, and I'll talk about that later as one of the barriers that we hope to address. So it's a family-based study, acknowledging that how people define their family, their source of support. I'm not talking about a biological family. I'm talking about, perhaps for lots of people, the family that they build around them. The idea that we're looking at things that are multi-generational. There is an intergenerational transmission of mental health and addictions challenges, and that has driven the narrative around stigma. And that's why I stand here today, is that people are rejecting that narrative that you have to be the same thing that happened to your parents, that you have to be the same part of the system where you grew up. And so the multi-generational longitudinal pathways that we're studying, with a large enough sample of Ohioans that we can actually understand unique predictive pathways with modifiable factors, then gives you all the information that you can work with to develop new treatments, to build on the amazing treatments that you're already doing. So this is our partners. And when we first started talking about SOAR, it was like bringing science to the people. And it was like, actually, no, that's not the language that I'd prefer to use. I like to talk about science from, for, and with the families of Ohio, because actually, this is a partnership, right? I have technical skills as a scientist that I can bring to bear, and I have clinical skills as a psychologist that I can bring to bear. But I cannot conjure up these stories. I cannot conjure up the biological, familial information that's actually going to help us to understand pathways to resilience. So it's a partnership. As part of this partnership, we are acknowledging that Ohio is a big state. Ohio has lots of geography and diversity to it, and that's amazing. But also, there's lots of folks in Ohio, in our rural areas and in our inner cities, who feel left out and left behind. And you all know that in some ways they're right. They have been left out and left behind. So SOAR is an acknowledgement, and humble acknowledgement, that even though we have been doing our best, we need to do more, and we can do more. So this is a mobile MRI scanner that's going to different rural sites around the state. In addition to that, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we have 2 sites in Columbus, Nationwide Children's Hospital and Ohio State University. And when I come to the point where I ask you for your support and help later. We'll talk about how families can become involved in the studies. All right, so why Ohio? Well, Ohio has a long history of leading, and I think it would be appropriate to think about how Ohio can be a leader in changing the narrative around mental health and bending the curve towards resilience and wellness. Anything that we learn in Ohio because of our geographic, social, economic, racial, and ethnic diversity can then be translated into other places within our country. A big part, and this is actually the part where I apologize, a big part of this initiative came, I think, from a clever conversation that a data analyst had with the governor during COVID, because the governor was getting weekly reports about COVID deaths. And somebody probably snuck in the suicide and overdose deaths into the COVID report. And the governor perked up and said, our people are actually struggling quite a bit in Ohio. And the apology that I'm giving to you now is that the legislative process that brought us SOAR is not the process that we would have actually liked to develop in the emergence of SOAR. Most of the time we start out with coalition building, right? I'm here today, actually 9 months after we started, to start with a coalition building with Adam H., right? So I'm kind of cart before the horse, or maybe even horse outside the barn apology at this point. Hopefully you'll forgive that, because that was a function of the legislative process, not a function of our interests and wishes. So we do have an active interest, willingness, and drive to partner with you all. So anyone who wants to have our dog and pony show come to you, and more importantly, anyone who wants to teach us what we should be paying attention to and why we should be paying attention to certain things, please do reach out, because we need you. And when we think about what SOAR is intended to do, it's not designed to do something new. It's designed to build off of the bedrock of what you're all doing already and add, right? We're not replacing, we're not directing, we're trying to build and expand. And so these are the different sort of things that we're hoping to do in our engagement process, and we are grateful for and desperately asking for support in rolling out these initiatives. So please do engage with us. We'd be very grateful for that. And that's actually another ask that I'll have towards the end of my presentation. You'll see at the bottom that there's a community advisory board. We are missing is always a strange word to use, but missing is the right word here. We are missing diversity in our community advisory board. And so I ask you to give us suggestions, because inclusivity and diversity is about representation. And we have lots of scientists. We do not have community activists. We do not have as many people of color as we need and would like. And so I will ask for support and assistance there later. So how does this actually work? What is the process of what SOAR is intending to do? So we have a big wellness discovery survey. Folks from all 88 counties in Ohio are participating. It's kind of like a broad 1 hour survey. I've actually got some postcards that you can take and hand out to folks if you want. You can take a postcard for yourself to fill out. And that gives us sort of a sense of what are the drivers of adversity that people are experiencing, what are the mental health challenges that people are experiencing, what does family and community support look like, and then what are their what are the known resilience capabilities that people have. And of course, there are unknown resilience capabilities that we expect to have out there that we'll learn. There's also a brain health study. The brain health study includes brain imaging. It includes EEG, which is electrodes on your head to see how people respond to certain types of stressors, how they can navigate prior traumas, questionnaires, interviews, blood tests. And the goal is to do just like Framingham, to use that information to try and understand what are some of the potentially modifiable risk factors for mental health and addiction. And then there's a loop. There's a loop that actually brings us back here, hopefully in a year, maybe in 2 years, where we come back and we start talking about some of the data. And you start saying, hey, Scott, that doesn't make any sense, or that's absolutely right, do more of that, so that we actually have a dialogue and a conversation about what some of these modifiable risk factors are and how we can actually convey that information to the people that we work with every day so that they can see that in those moments of despair that there is actually possibility and there is hope. And then we move that into pilot intervention studies, trying new things and see how they work. We expand our workforce. You already have an initiative for that. We think about what wellness looks like in our workforce and how we retain people so that we can actually deliver good quality services. So this is just a few of our partners so far. We want to add your picture up here as well. All right, and these are some of the things that we're actually rolling out. So we've hired a SOAR support navigator, and that person, when we're meeting with these families and we identify that they have unmet needs for care, our support navigators are going to actually help them to connect with your agencies or appropriate services. We already have a system in place for when we interact with folks who are in crisis, how to provide support from them. And then we also just got our participant experience survey rolled out, and that is, again, part of that virtuous cycle of learning, which has evolved, right? It used to be, even 10 years ago, I, as a scientist, would ask you questions, you would answer the questions, and then I would come to my astute conclusions about what was wrong with you and what you needed to do next. It's a much more dynamic process now. I share information with you and you say to me, no, that's not right, Scott, or that actually is really helpful, do more of that. And so in communicating with service providers like yourselves, but also with patients and families, it's moving towards more of a dynamic exchange of information. And that is a really powerful process, because when people start to feel ownership of what SOAR can be, then they start talking about it with their legislators, with their community leaders, and then we can grow this. And it actually comes back to, in your report, and actually what Erica Clark-Jones was talking about, some of the care gaps, right? Those care gaps actually move when people feel empowered to advocate for themselves, right? You all know this. I've been in this business for 25 years. The single biggest challenge we actually have is that most of our folks that we work with don't believe that they deserve a better tomorrow. They don't believe that they deserve a better tomorrow, because when they get to that point where they know that I deserve better, they will advocate. And there's lots of people who could then advocate. And then the voices rise and we will not be denied. So let me give you a little bit of results. It can be long-winded. Hopefully this is interesting for you all. We've had tremendous, and I mean tremendous response. We started this survey 9 months ago, and we have 70 to 100% of target responses across the state. Franklin and Delaware counties are amongst our top responders. You can see, it's hard to tell, but they're near 90%. And actually, you'll note that we actually have over 100% response in Southeast Appalachia. So the message of SOAR, when people see, I should have brought it up, when people see, I'm going to jump down and grab it. It's okay. When people see this postcard in the mail, So these postcards are sent out to 300,000 Ohioans across the state. It just sort of says, hey, help your neighbors in your county and receive a $50 gift card. And in the back, it talks about what SOAR is and what the Wellness Discovery Survey is. People are seeing that, and they're actually encouraged that people are actually listening and trying to understand some of the challenges that they're facing. And we got great response across age ranges. We actually have great responses from all of our traditionally underserved groups. So people of color, people in rural spaces are responding in numbers consistent with our census numbers of 2020. So we're getting people to speak up. This graph is going to take me a minute to walk through with you, but I think it's actually a really helpful graph to sort of think about how Ohio has changed over the last couple decades and where some of our opportunities and challenges lie. So I want you to focus on the blue bars first, or I guess light blue bars. Those are folks who live within 50 miles of where they lived when they were 10 years old. So on the one hand, you could sort of look at that and say, well, that means that they're actually really satisfied with the community that they grew up in, and they're staying in that community. But those of us who have been in this business a long time also know that some of those folks actually are trapped by lack of economic and social mobility. And so there's potentially a lack of opportunities for those folks. And if you look at, Cleveland, within the city limits, Lucas County, some of our Appalachian locations, there's not as much mobility as we would like. On the flip side, the pink bars indicate the people who have come from farther than 50 miles away, and often from outside Ohio. And those are really strong markers. Those are markers that economists use all the time of growth, right? Economic growth. People come to where there's opportunity. And we'd like, if we had our way, to have those pink bars be larger for all of our regions in Ohio. There's old data, and that old data is probably something you're going to say, yeah, we know this already, Scott. There's old data showing that economic and educational opportunity are the easiest modifiable risk factors when we think about adversity to address. And by easiest, I mean we have a huge Intel plant coming just northeast of Columbus now, bringing hundreds, if not thousands of jobs to central Ohio. That will have an impact on mental health and addiction in a positive direction. All right. This was actually a questionnaire that we added at the end about economic optimism. And of course, sometimes scientists and journalists sort of take a competing road to what's the most negative storyline we could come with. The scale was actually an economic skepticism scale, and I chose to reject that and flip the scale and talk about economic optimism. So the first thing I would say to you is that this is a scale where lower numbers are better. The scale goes from 5 to 15. And so the narrative that we have around the state that I've been hearing from many people is that people are not very optimistic about economic opportunities in Ohio. This data actually tells a different story. People are actually feeling pretty optimistic about economic opportunities in Ohio. So a score of 7, even a score of 8, towards the bottom is still below what would be an average score. So there's optimism out there. So I'm running out of time, but I do want to come to the main points of what I wanted to share with you today, which is this is a tremendous opportunity for us all. And so you might be looking at me and saying, yes, God, it's a great opportunity for you. And I would say, no, actually, it's a tremendous opportunity for us all. Because those of us who have been in the mental health space for a long time know that about every 8 to 10 years, there's sort of this surge towards, we're actually going to treat brain illnesses the same as we treat other illnesses, and we're going to break this cabal on how insurance spreads out behavioral health from other aspects of health. This happened in 2008, it happened in the late 90s. We're at that moment again where there's a surge of enthusiasm and voice around saying, actually, we're spending a lot of money and we're not helping people get well. How about if we spend that money more wisely and help people move towards resilience? So as Eric was sharing with us beforehand, a good number of veterans who have served their country end up in the criminal justice system. Like that's a tragedy. A good number of our ethnic youth actually end up in the criminal justice system before they even get a shot at opportunities. So this is a broad message. Sorry, I got a little bit emotional there. All right. So what we learn here can be applied everywhere. And this is actually a really important message because it brings me to the last slide. Oh, nope, not the last slide. So let me tell you a little bit about the Brain Health and Discovery Study real quick. So this is a graph, a complicated graph of sort of what illness looks like. And most of the time when we interact with folks in our system, it is in the acute, active state of an illness, where care is super expensive, and where we're actually often doing triage rather than wellness building, right? So what would be a beautiful thing that could come out of this, which you might be saying, well, we can't do that, Scott, we can't figure it out. But I would put to you that actually I can use a cholesterol test now, I can use high blood pressure now to actually talk with you about modifiable risk factors for cardiovascular illness. That didn't emerge out of nowhere. It emerged out of a number of decades of sustained study. We actually know some of the modifiable risk factors that can move people towards resilience already. You know that stuff. But there's probably stuff that we don't know yet that we can learn. And so the idea is that if we can move people into that prodromal stage where we're delivering those prevention services that Erica was talking about in a timely and effective way, we can then actually deliver wellness and resilience services in addition to providing crisis services for people who don't quite get caught early enough. But we don't want to always be doing crisis stuff, always be doing triage, right? We want to be thinking about how can we help people sooner. So you may or may not know that just 6 miles to the north and a little bit to the west of here, we in Columbus are actually helping build the next space station. You might say, well, why in the world are we showing a space station when we're talking about mental health and addiction? I was looking at a graph of inventions just the other day, a couple months ago, and there have been 5 sort of evolutions of inventions. The information age is the most recent one. Wouldn't it be amazing if Ohio was actually at the center of the 6th generation of invention? And our invention is actually additional pathways to wellness. And I would put to you that that is a little bit of a bold statement, but I want you to think about that and savor that thought for a moment, that we could lead in developing new pathways to resilience. I think we can. And I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm excited about it. And so that is the point where I actually transition to the things that I'm going to ask, which I left over here. So I have two main asks of you all. So the most important one, and thank you, Erica, for the invitation, is a humble invitation to be a partner in this process. So today is just one day, but it's potential for the beginning of conversations. hey Scott, I've noticed this with the people who come through my agency, or hey Scott, this is what I've noticed in the families who tend to do better that come from my community. Because the more that we listen and learn, the more that I listen and learn, and take off my science hat and put on my human being hat and my psychologist hat, the better we can be together, and we can have conversations about how to move this forward. So that's my first ask of you, is to be a partner in this journey. With that partnership, communication and honesty, that's all I ask. The second ask, we have, I mentioned this before, we have these fancy postcards, and there's another one that you can take with you. It's okay. I'm in to get my steps in. So this is another postcard you can take with you, and this is the moment where Jamal and Irvi and Chuck, could you stand up? So they've all got postcards if you want to grab them. There's a QR code that folks can scan. This is a study that's open to all Ohioans. So if you want to participate, you can. If you want to take some of these back to your agency and hand them out to some of the people that you serve, you can. And let me elaborate on that point. When we look at prior studies like this, there have been no studies that have looked at families and not in an intergenerational way. When we look at prior studies, we overwhelmingly study white women who are worried and well. That is not our goal here. Our goal is to study all of the people of Ohio. And there are some real challenges in doing that. And I'm hopeful that you can help us to understand some of the barriers. I'm going to talk about them in a minute. But to get true voice and participation from the families that you serve. Without that, and I mean this with all sincerity, we could take that money that was given for the study and flush it down the toilet, because it's not going to be valuable if we continue to study people who are worried, white women, and well, mostly well. There's value in those studies, trust me, but that is not going to bend the curve that we need to bend, because, as Erica illustrated, our black men, the numbers are not going in the direction that we'd like. Our elderly, the direction is not going in the way that we like. Most of our overdoses and suicides are in folks who have not been studied systematically. So I ask you for assistance in that. I alluded to it before. We are looking for an active participant or participants as consultants on our community advisory board. It is a paid position. I'm hopeful to entreat you all, to beg you all, to suggest folks from underrepresented communities, people of color, perhaps veterans, to serve on that board. Also, when we're talking about workforce retention, SOAR is an opportunity for us to speak to the next generation of healthcare workers about where we're going. And so when we talk about students in higher ed, if there are folks who want to join us, we have 2 positions open now. We're looking to have more positions. Okay, now, Erica asked me to talk about barriers, and I'm going to talk about barriers. So these are things you all know well. Trust. There's a balance between trust and hope here, and I'm going to just tackle it head on. There is a real and meaningful lack of trust in what the government will do with this information. And I balance that with hope. So I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that I can't control what our leaders are going to do with the information that we collect. So our mandate, our goal is to collect the information and to report it honestly. What our leaders do with it after that is another thing. But part of that trust, an important part of that trust, is that we hope that we can, as I alluded to before, help people to start raising their voices about what their needs are, so that it's not always this, not a word you should use, often. It's not often healthcare providers who are doing most of the advocacy. We want our families to stand shoulder to shoulder with us and advocate with us. So that's part of building trust and hope. There are real barriers, transportation and time. So, families who are struggling, even families who are not struggling so much, it can be difficult to set aside time to participate in a study like SOAR. We do compensate families for participation. It's about a 6-hour commitment spread out over a couple of days for each person. It's one of the few research studies that families can do together, so it actually can be a family growth experience. They get to come to a facility, but here would be Nationwide or Ohio State. They can come with a family member and actually have kind of open discussions about mental health and addictions, which is a novelty in a healthcare setting, right? Oftentimes it's the patient only that comes and the family is left at the door. So it can be a growth experience. So about $325 for that participation. So it's a meaningful amount of money to honor people's voice and time. And then the final barrier I want to mention comes back to this idea of stigma, which is understanding. People understanding that what we don't know about resilience, what we don't know about mental health and addiction, is not something to fear. It's an opportunity. And what that means is kind of what I was alluding to before, is that we are not predestined to be not resilient. We are not predestined to be resilient. We embrace the idea that resilience is something that we can move toward and learn. And that is the point where I thank you all and hope that there's some questions. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
How long is your study open?
The study, the data gathering happening now will be going through the end of June of 2025. But the goal is to have the study go for decades and for generations, so that we not only can see the pathways towards illness and resilience that are in place now, but as we move towards these new interventions or even evaluate existing interventions, we can better understand these modifiable risk factors. Thanks. Yeah.
If you had to give a definition to the word resilience, how would you define it? Because I just hear a lot of different definitions. So I'm interested to hear from you.
So yes, an analogy. We are not rock. We are clay. We are moldable, right? We are not stone. We are bamboo. So the simplest definition is all of us at some point in our lives will fall down. Resilience is about how do you get back up? And it doesn't mean you have to do so gracefully. It doesn't mean you have to do so on your own. It just means how do you get back up again? And so I use a very broad definition of resilience. Does that help? Yeah.
So you spoke, and I could have missed it, but you spoke about wanting to engage the community and have more representation in the study, which is exactly, which is exactly what is needed. I appreciate that. What I am a little concerned about, though, is the institutions. Oftentimes, nationwide is considered an institution, and so is, of course, the Ohio State is an institution. So if we are wanting to engage the community, I'd love to have dialogue really about how do we connect to the community. People aren't coming to you to tell you their story. They will come to you if you're in their community in a place of trust.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. 100%. How can we do that in a way that feels collaborative and honest and not, I'll use the word, extractive, right? Or worse. Because I don't, like I said, I don't want to pursue this study if we're not doing it for all of Ohioans. To me, that would be a tragedy. Hopefully that helps answer your question. Yeah. Oh, over here.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Starks, and I am the CEO and Clinical Director of Starks Counseling. I'm also a member of the National Association of Social Workers. I have a small private practice. I work mostly with people who have experienced some level of trauma. So my question to you is, are you guys going to put forth a concerted effort to work with small private practices? Because I saw a lot of large organizations and institutions, but a lot of this diversity that you're looking for could probably be found if you're working with smaller private practices around the state.
Yes. So I'm going to tie both of those questions together because I'm going to bring up another really important point. We start from a foundation of understanding resilience, that resilience doesn't have to come through a doctor's office. It doesn't have to come through a counseling service, although I'm sure your counseling service is amazing. It might come through a church. It might come through a soccer club. It might come through a music group. All of that participation is what we're looking for. And so to both of your points, it's not intended to remain an institutional coalition. It is intended to become a groundswell of, and it sounds silly to say this, every time I say it, my boss looks at me, he says, don't say that. The best case scenario is when SOAR actually leaves my hands and is in your hands. Because when it moves out of my control, that means it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. People are trusting it, and they're seeing it as an agenda and an avenue to move towards wellness. That is, to me, the pathway, and I need advice, support, and help to move it to that place. So it's not just a research study, it actually becomes an initiative, a coalition, a driving force to change the way we think about mental health and addiction in our state. All right. Thank you.